This series looks at some of the most interesting and important global events of our time. But it's not merely an impersonal chronological account. Each program takes a different theme and tells the stories through the eyes of the people who were there, people who make us all a witness. The crime of the century, they called it. The biggest train robbery in history. On August the 8th, 1963, at 3:10 in the morning, a fake red light stopped the Glasgow to London mail train at Cheddington in Buckinghamshire. 15 masked men broke into the mail van and removed 120 mail bags stuffed with more than £2.5 million of banknotes, all on their way to be destroyed. Within weeks, most members of the gang had been arrested, 12 of them sentenced to a total of 307 years in prison. Among them was Ronnie Biggs. In July 1965, Biggs escaped from Wandsworth Jail and fled to South America. Despite many attempts, British police have failed to get Biggs extradited. Fathering a son by a Brazilian woman has ensured that he has stayed on the run for more than 30 years. Other members of the gang also escaped, but were not so lucky. Charlie Wilson made it to Canada, establishing a new life and a new identity. The law, however, caught up with him. He was rearrested and flown back to Britain to serve out the rest of his time. Ronnie Biggs, though, remains a free man, the most famous participant of this very famous crime.
It's obvious they don't really want him back. It happened more than 30 years ago. What would they do with him? Put him away and make him a martyr? Better to leave him where he is and forget all about it.
The gold carrier's Brinks Mat had seen many bizarre crimes, even a mobile crane being used to smash open a bullion-carrying van. However, they were not expecting the apparent perfection of the robbery carried out on November the 26th, 1983.
It had to be an inside job. Not one alarm went off. The whole system was bypassed.
In the biggest gold bullion robbery of all time, more than £25 million was stolen from the Brinks Mat warehouse at Heathrow Airport, London. The trail in search of the gang members took years to follow, initially centering on a number of villas in Spain. One man, John Fleming, was tracked around the world from one hideout to the next for over 3 years. They tried to extradite him, only to see his lawyers fight to keep him out of Britain. A succession of last-minute reprieves saw American courts allowing him to get off return flights at literally the last moment. And finally, when the police did succeed in bringing Fleming home, he had to be released for lack of evidence. The trail also had its tragic side stories. In 1985, two plainclothes police officers, John Fordham and Neil Murphy, were on surveillance in Kent, southeast England, at the house of Kenneth Noy, a man suspected of being part of the robbery. When they were attacked by Noy's dogs, Murphy went for backup, leaving Fordham to face the dogs and Mr. Noy alone. Detective Constable Fordham was brutally stabbed and killed. Noy was eventually cleared of the murder, but guilty of handling stolen gold as the Brinks Mat trail unraveled. The bullion had been smelted down and sold on the open market, leading the police through a maze that led down many dead ends. The proceeds from the sales had been transferred in cash in and out of a series of British bank accounts. Hundreds of thousands of pounds literally carried from one location to another. The thieves had devised a clever and complex plan. Much of the money was then flown or driven to a whole series of banks in Switzerland. It was here that one of the biggest money laundering operations known took place. A group of Britons, including solicitor Michael Relton, carried out the final maneuvers. $2.8 million went to the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank. $3 million to accounts in Liechtenstein, 70 miles away, beneath the shadow of the old castle. By this time, the gang thought that the money trail must have gone cold, so they started spending. In Britain, they bought the New Caledonian Wharf. They invested in large British mansions. At Kathleen McAvoy's £250,000 house in Kent, police found two Rottweilers called Brinks and Matt. Another $4 million was found in an Irish account fronted by Janet Reeder. Over the years, the gang members were picked up, one by one until 1992, when Gordon Parry and Patrick Clark were convicted of money laundering. Both the Brinks-Matt and Great Train robberies were isolated crimes. However, for a true reign of terror, you need look no further than the Mafia, a secret organisation with hundreds of years of history. The home of the Mafia is in Sicily, where the authorities have been fighting a losing battle against organised crime for decades. Extortion is an everyday activity. If donations to the prisoners' welfare fund are not paid, retribution is swift, and bodies in the streets make sure that future payments are not missed. One of the problems for the authorities has always been that once they've arrested the leaders, new young mafiosi are always ready to take their place. Sicily's recent history has been a story of carnage. In the mid-80s, as the heroin trade came to the fore, over 500 people were killed in just 2 years. For one old-style boss, Tommaso Bucetta, it was too much. In 1984, after his family were virtually wiped out, he squealed and turned in 6,000 words of evidence, listing over 100 assassins. It resulted in mass arrests. The courtroom was packed, security unprecedented. For the first time in years, the Mafia had been penetrated in its homeland. But of course, Sicily is not now their main stronghold. In the 19th century, Sicilian immigrants began to travel to America, and the Mafia threat went with them. They initiated an organization that came to control gambling, prostitution, and drugs. And now, in this modern age, they're investing in construction and pizzerias as a way to profit and launder at the same time. The Mafia expanded vastly with the introduction of Prohibition in 1920. By 1935, Charles Lucky Luciano had over 1,200 prostitutes on his payroll, bringing him $10 million gross each year. Al Capone set up in Chicago in 1919. 10 years and 1,000 deaths later, Capone became the unchallenged underworld boss of the city. It was after Capone's arrest in 1931 on tax evasion charges, however, that Luciano and the other bosses formed the Commission of the Cosa Nostra. Basing its structure on General Motors, it survives to this day in the form of the 10 families who rule organized crime in America. But the infighting still goes on. And so does the struggle for the authorities to control their power. Men such as Paul Castellano, eventually assassinated in a hail of bullets. Or Fat Tony Salerno, who raised $2 million bail on the spot. Then there was the feared mobster John Gotti, who was convicted of murder, extortion and drug trafficking and sentenced to life.
I looked round the court and I could see it in their eyes. They were still scared of him. They've just given him 100 years and they're still scared. The man just wields so much power.
It is suspected by many that Gotti still controls the mob from his cell. However, perhaps the single biggest threat from organized crime faced by the world is that of the Triads, the ultra-secret Chinese underground organization. Originating in the mists of time, the Triads are bound by blood ties, frightening oaths of loyalty, and secret rituals. Their headquarters, Hong Kong. The Triads make a living by the squeeze, an expression that's brought fear to legitimate businesses for centuries. The society squeezes legitimate business by controlling much of the catering industry, employment, and most of all, gambling and drugs. The Hong Kong police have done their best, but it was seldom enough.
Gambling's the easiest to smoke out. It's in one place, and the Chinese love to gamble. But the drug pushers are the real problem. They're on every street corner, in every alley. You see them, but they're gone in a second.
Now the Chinese control Hong Kong, the Triads are expanding their activities more than ever. Wherever there's a Chinese community, the Triads are there. No better example can be found than London's Chinatown in the heart of the West End. Police raids reveal hordes of wicked-looking knives that could be used for summary retribution in the form of choppings. These are perpetrated on anyone who betrays the Triads or gets in their way. As with all organized crime, the stakes are high and the people in control are the winners. Meanwhile, the mafia style has now been exported to the other side of the world. In the years since the fall of communism, the Russian mafia has taken over. Sad to say, the arrival of a capitalist society was bound to open up Russia to the attentions of organized crime, but no one could have predicted that it would happen so fast.
Like most of my associates, I have to pay protection if I want to stay in business. I reckon I have paid out about $500,000 in the last few years.
But you must understand, if it wasn't for the mafia, there wouldn't be any business. They direct what goes on here.
Perhaps the biggest problem for Russia is the scale of the crime. The exact figures may never be known, but perhaps half of the Western manufactured goods brought into Russia, more than 30 billion worth, are imported illegally. And they are paid for by convoys of trucks carrying the lifeblood of the country, oil from Azerbaijan, coal from Siberia, timber from the Ukraine. At the moment, there seems to be no way out. And it's the people that get caught in the middle. One gang based in the suburbs of Moscow specializes in drugs and gun smuggling. Special squads of law enforcers do their best. But for every bust that succeeds, many more fail.
It's pathetic, really. We raid an apartment and find some drugs, or maybe a few weapons. But we never reach the center, the heart of the operation. They are too clever. They are always 2 steps ahead of us.
At the end of the 20th century, the biggest money is earned from drugs. Much of the West's problems stem from the poppy fields of Pakistan and Afghanistan. And if and when governments try to wipe out the crop, they encounter furious resistance from the farmers.
We are poor, we are weak, but there is no way we can live without it.
In Afghanistan, the Islamic Taliban government fights its wars with the proceeds of drugs.
It's incredible. A regime that runs on the strictest religious principles issues permits in exchange for a tax. Permits that allow carriers free access across the borders in and out of Afghanistan. Drug smuggling with official approval.
The real earners, however, are the barons of the business who export millions of dollars worth to every country in the world. The United States Drug Enforcement Agency is committed to fighting them, a hard and thankless task. Public enemy number 1 is the town of Medellin in Colombia, the drug center of the world. There the drug barons live in splendor on the money earned from exporting billions of dollars worth of drugs. The narcotics agents target the main men, but they're counted at every turn. An arrest is made and the drugs haul is burnt. Fields are destroyed, but more can always be planted. Official planes are liable to be blown up. Meanwhile, the killings continue, and the drug lords maintain their power bases, even after they are arrested and sentenced. The feared Rodriguez Orjuela family is headed by brothers Miguel and Gilberto. They run the infamous Cali cartel and in 1995 were imprisoned for 19 and 22 years, but have since seen their sentences halved and halved again by judges regularly bribed with millions of dollars. In addition, the Colombian government faces a new threat. Whilst it attempts to destroy the drug fields with weed killer, on the ground the left-wing guerrillas have teamed up with the drug lords in an unholy alliance that makes tens of millions of dollars each year. And the government planes face the regular prospect of being shot out of the sky.
Corruption's everywhere. There's no one you can trust. The government keeps making those statements about fighting the big bosses, but they can't stick by them. The whole country runs on the stuff. They can't afford to let it all go.
The nature of the pitfalls for the DEA in fighting drugs was never more clearly illustrated than by the case of General Ribeiro. A top Mexican general, he was given the highest security clearance by the Americans in combating the drugs war. He was even invited to special summits in Washington and given the latest US intelligence. That was until he was arrested in his penthouse apartment with the millions of dollars he'd been paid by the drug cartels. Though Colombia still ranks as the world's top producer of cocaine and is a major distributor of marijuana and heroin, nevertheless, some DEA successes have led to the death or arrests of some of the biggest drug barons. However, these successes have only served to underline another blight on America, the Mexican drug trade. Every day, thousands of cars cross the border between Mexico and the United States, the vast majority legally. But El Paso is also the prime crossing point for drug smugglers. The situation becomes even worse when informants reveal the widespread corruption prevalent amongst the border guards. Amado Carrillo Fuentes used to run the Juarez Group, a huge Mexican drug cartel. His death during plastic surgery set off a bloody power struggle for control. But still the drugs come in by the ton, and the smugglers are getting more clever about hiding them. Some say that the only answer is to follow the lead of Malaysia and impose the death penalty.
The end of prayers at dawn echoed over Kajang prison and signalled the end of Derek Gregory. There was no dignity in his death. There'd been little in his life. Gregory, said to be one of life's losers, had spent 7 years in Malaysian jails for smuggling more than a pound of heroin.
Of course it scares me. No man wants to die, do they?
And though the threat of hanging may be a deterrent to foreign dealers, it's done little to solve Malaysia's own internal drugs problem. Accordingly, Malaysia's policy against drug smugglers is the world's toughest. More than 60 people have been hanged for trafficking. You can hardly miss the message. But Derek Gregory ignored it, and it cost him his life.
What were the worst crimes of the century? Well, most of them had nothing to do with money. They were usually caused by twisted ideologies like fascism, in that case led by just one man, Adolf Hitler, and brutally carried out by his henchmen.
And you could see the people as they came off the train, assemble on the ramp and walk slowly into a gas chamber and come out as black smoke. And that was the daily picture that you had in Auschwitz.
With a nod of a finger like this, they would decide who was to go to the right or the left. One side was to live and the other side was to die. Now, on that day, I lost my mother, 2 younger brothers, one of 10 and one of 12, 2 grandmothers, numerous uncles and aunts and their families, most of my friends, and most of the people from the entire area in one day.
The scenes that I've seen, I can't explain. It's impossible in a short while to explain what I saw. But my hair went white. The next day I saw I had grey hair. My hair was cut. And I can't go back because I left my family there. And I got angina now. And if I go back, I'm afraid I'll stay there. I'll think I'll die there.
I think I never dreamt that I would come out of this hell. But having come out, I think we mustn't let it be forgotten what really went on in here.
The war in Europe ended in May 1945. 6 months later, 22 Nazi leaders went on trial at Nuremberg.
I watched them as the sentences were read out. They showed no emotion. They'd been chatting and laughing together during the trial, but now they were on their own. All I can remember is that word.
It will be entered as a plea of not guilty.
Guilty. Guilty. Guilty.
Most of the Nazi leaders were at least brought to trial. But in general, today, around the world, that's not the case. The war against crime is not being won, and civilized society will continue to be the main victim. Every crime has a motive, or at least the criminal seems to believe so. It can be love or hate, for money, or maybe just for a perverse sense of fun. But in the case of Peter Sutcliffe, he wanted to rid the streets of prostitutes. The man who became known as the Yorkshire Ripper took his mission even further. He picked on any woman who was walking the streets at night alone. Following time-wasting hoax letters, the police received a tape recording purporting to come from the killer. The voice drove the police in yet another direction, towards a man with a certain accent. All these diversions put the police off the scent, but on the 2nd of January 1981, a routine police patrol noticed a suspicious-looking car and took the driver in for questioning. This time, they had their man. Sutcliffe was charged with murdering 13 women, the body of his final victim, Jacqueline Hill, having only been found 2 months before the arrest. Less than 5 months later, Sutcliffe was found guilty and sentenced to a minimum of 30 years. An evil man had been put away. 15 years earlier, 2 killers had stood in a courtroom at Chester and listened as they were both sentenced to life imprisonment. For 2 weeks, the nation had been shocked into disbelief as the story unfolded. Over the 2 years since 1964, Ian Brady and Myra Hindley had kidnapped children, sexually abused them, and killed them, before burying them in shallow graves on Saddleworth Moor near Manchester.
Everyone was in tears as we listened to the tape. We heard that child's voice. How could anyone do that?
Brady and Hindley are still in jail more than 30 years later, symbols of evil. Meanwhile, still grieving relations of the dead children continue to look for retribution. In 1987, new interest was awakened in the case when Hindley announced that 2 further murders had been committed and that both the bodies were also buried on the moors. Brady and Hindley both helped in the search, returning under police escort and protection to the burial grounds. The body of Pauline Reed was found. Finally, a family could put their little girl to rest. The body of the other victim, 12-year-old Keith Bennett, has never been found. But for all these families, the ordeal will never end. In the last few years, the subject of release has come up. Hindley and her supporters claim that she has served her time and that she is no longer a menace to society. She looks for compassion. But ask any of the families of the victims, would they want Myra Hindley released? Would we? And would America want Charles Manson released either?
Again, any questions my sanity? I question him, huh? Are you sane? Sane? That's relative.
In 1969, Manson and his so-called family sent shockwaves through America when Sharon Tate, actress and pregnant wife of film director Roman Polanski, together with 4 friends, were horribly murdered in Beverly Hills. The image of wealth and security for Hollywood stars had been shattered by a madman and his followers who lived, ironically, in the remnants of an old Western film set. At first it appeared the victims were just random targets, but Manson was not pleased. He had not been involved that night and was apparently offended by the bloodbath. 2 nights later, Manson himself led 5 of his family to another house and showed how he thought killings should be done. The family disappeared, but one, Susan Atkins, was picked up on a prostitution charge and while in custody admitted her role in the killings. The family was rounded up, convicted and sentenced to death. Later, the sentences were commuted to life imprisonment. 30 years after the funeral of a beautiful young actress, Manson still languishes in prison. People think Manson is crazy, and he's the first to agree, as he's admitted at many of his parole hearings over the years.
He actually said, "There's no one as bad as me. I'm everywhere. I'm down in San Diego Zoo. I'm in the trees. I'm in your children. Someone has to be insane. We can't all be good guys."
The same evil that haunts Charles Manson haunts the men who kill and kill again for another reason: cannibalism. Men like Nikolai Zhumagaliev, who murdered Russian women during the 1970s and fed them to his unsuspecting neighbors. Others like schoolteacher Andrei Chikatilo, who was sentenced to death for more than 50 murders. During his trial, Chikatilo was chained inside a huge iron cage. Rather than to protect the court, the cage was there to protect Chikatilo from the baying crowds of his victims' families, who pleaded with the judge to be allowed to take the law into their own hands. But perhaps the most infamous serial killer of all was Jeffrey Dahmer. Dahmer was arrested in 1991 after police received complaints from his neighbors. At the apartments in Milwaukee, they had heard the sound of a power saw at all hours of day and night. There was a stench of rotting meat. Cries were heard and thumps from falling objects. What the police found turned their stomachs.
I was violently sick. I still get the nightmares now. I can't believe anyone could do that. There was horror everywhere. Every door, every pot, just everywhere.
To have a preliminary hearing in this case.
In court, Dahmer's story was revealed to an appalled audience. An alcoholic by the age of 16, he had committed his first murder at 18. For years his fantasies grew, and so did the gruesome killings. 2 in 1988, 4 in 90, 8 in 91. As mothers cried in anguish, Dahmer was sent down. But his miserable life lasted only a short while longer. In 1992, he was beaten to death in prison by an inmate. In October 1991, George Hennard crashed his truck into a Luby's cafeteria in Texas, got out and calmly shot 22 people.
He was shooting as fast as he could. It was like there were 5 of him. It just went on and on.
It seemed he was aiming at women, a fact borne out by a letter he'd sent to a neighbour. Quote, "Please give me the satisfaction of some day laughing in the face of those mostly white, treacherous female vipers from those 2 towns who tried to destroy me and my family." When police arrived, Hennard eventually killed himself. The gun is more a part of the American way of life than it is of the British. So when a similar tragedy occurs in Britain, it shocks even more. Such a tragedy happened at the local primary school in the small Scottish town of Dunblane on Wednesday, the 13th of March, 1996. At around 9:30 in the morning, Thomas Hamilton, a 43-year-old local man, walked into the school carrying 4 handguns. He went into Mrs. Gwen Mayer's class and started shooting. Within minutes, 16 5- and 6-year-old children and Mrs. Mayer were dead. Hamilton then turned the gun on himself. As the news spread, parents rushed to the scene. The tears flowed, as many were reunited with their loved ones. But for the others, the tears were tears of despair. The tragedy began a train of events that culminated in a nationwide gun ban. Thousands were handed in to police stations. But why did he do it? Why did he want to harm innocent children? Perhaps the answer lies in Hamilton himself. He had run a boys' club, which had been shut down. He partly blamed the teachers at Dunblane, who had been instrumental in the closure. He'd been kicked out of the Scout organisation after inappropriate behaviour, and he had been barred from joining 2 gun clubs due to his spreading reputation. But this highly doubtful character still owned a firearms certificate. He still managed to join a gun club in another area, and on that March morning, he took out his irrational anger on the children at the primary school. The pain of Dunblane is clear to see. The town is still trying to get back some sense of normalcy. But the jagged sorrow will remain in people's hearts forever.
Now the next thing is, there's one...
This is Westside Middle School, Jonesboro, Arkansas. Andrew Golden, aged 11, and Mitchell Johnson, 13, set off the fire alarms. When the children began to leave, the 2 boys opened fire. 4 children and a teacher were killed.
They hated the school. We'd seen them with guns in the class before when they'd threatened girlfriends not to break up with them. But we never thought they'd really do it.
Both boys were charged with 5 counts of murder, but under Arkansas law, they will be released before their 18th birthdays. Again, the question is why? Was it something in their background that brought them to this, or what?
He was taught how to handle a gun.
One guy just grabbed his head and
In a
shot.
similar way, but for an entirely different reason, 15-year-old Kipling Kinkle murdered 5 people in a shooting spree at his school, Thurston High, in Springfield, Oregon. The day before the shootings, Kinkle had taken a gun into school. He had been expelled and arrested.
You could see the look on his face the day before when he was marched out. But no one thought he'd do this. He just walked into the cafeteria and started shooting.
But worse was to come. When the police went to his house, they found his parents murdered and the house booby-trapped. The bombs had been made with instructions downloaded from the internet. The thought of a child causing so much carnage is difficult to comprehend, seemingly unaware of the pain and misery caused by their actions. In April 1998, at an 8th grade dance in Edinburgh, Pennsylvania, a 14-year-old shot dead his science teacher. At such an age, it's difficult for even them to explain. Driven away in a police car, Andrew Worst appeared to laugh. Perhaps nobody will ever explain that. In a similar way, the abduction and death of Jamie Bulger at the hands of 11-year-old Robert Thompson and John Venables still tortures the rationale of the adult mind. On the 12th of February 1993, the 2-year-old boy left his mother's side at a shopping centre in Bootle, Liverpool, and disappeared. The public response was unprecedented. Hundreds of calls giving information 24 hours a day. For a while, the media in general and violent videos in particular were held responsible. There had to be a reason why such young children had dragged a toddler 2.5 miles to a railway siding and perpetrated such a relentless, violent and brutal attack. Jamie's body was found on Valentine's Day. Even experienced policemen found the crime hard to deal with. It was a story that shocked the British nation and brought fury in its wake. In Liverpool and across the country as a whole, people came together in a show of remembrance. The Jamie Bulger case still haunts the fabric of our supposedly law-abiding society. We still don't know why such things happen. In 1998, the Mary Bell case returned to the headlines. 30 years earlier, in 1968, 11-year-old Mary Bell had strangled 2 children. But 30 years later, our explanations were no more profound than they had been at the time. The murder of Eve Howells in Huddersfield, Yorkshire, was a strange one. Her eldest son, 15-year-old Glenn, raised the alarm, and when police arrived, they found her body battered to death in the home she shared with husband David and her 2 sons. It all seemed simple. Glenn admitted responsibility, but then the story got more twisted. He said his mother had verbally abused him for years. He had exploded and just hit out. He was sorry and wanted his mother back. But the police also found out that David Howells had been in on it. He had told the boys how much he hated her and how much money they would inherit if she was dead. In fact, he had used the boys to commit the crime on his behalf. The boys were detained indefinitely, and David Howells was sentenced to life. His alibi of being out drinking and playing darts counted for nothing. The judge told him, "You groomed and indoctrinated their young minds." There is a fine dividing line between love and hate, and the Howells family certainly had crossed that line. A bitter and confused hatred had exploded into a terrible act of murder. The cynical cover-up afterwards only made it seem even worse. John Tanner tried to cover his tracks after he murdered his girlfriend Rachel McLean in April 1991. He even took part in a reconstruction of what he claimed to be the truth. He and Rachel, a 19-year-old English student at Oxford, had gone to the railway station where she was seeing him off on the train. A friend of Rachel's had arrived and offered her a lift home. Tanner had never seen her again, he said, nor had anyone else. Tanner even gave the police a description of the friend, and only a few newspapers noticed the likeness to Tanner himself. Prior to the reconstruction, Tanner had appeared at a press conference, but subsequently no sightings were reported to the police.
It's been upsetting because it was the last time I saw her.
Where was she? For the police, none of this was adding up. They had already carried out a search of the student digs in which she had lived, but 18 days after her disappearance, they returned to perform a more thorough check. Her body was found beneath the floorboards of the downstairs room. With the details of his statement unravelling, it quickly became obvious that John Tanner had committed the murder.
In my heart of hearts, I like to think so.
Letters and Rachel's own diary told the true story of the relationship. While he was obsessively in love, she was writing in her diary, quote, "What a joke. I just wrote John's Valentine's card, full of sweet words I shoveled out from some fountain inside me. He's a sick, childish bastard." She had apparently admitted being unfaithful to him, and in an explosive rage of he had strangled her. Beautiful Kenya, vast open plains that lure adventure seekers by the thousand every year. It was this beauty that tempted Julie Ward back for her third trip in February 1988. On the 2nd of September, Julie drove out to the Masai Mara for one last trip before flying home. She never returned. It was her father John who found her body, or what was left of it. The authorities thought she had been killed by wild animals, but her father knew better. Pathology reports proved that she had been decapitated with a single blow. John's manhunt began. 4 years later, 2 Masai Mara rangers were put on trial. Jonah McGeroy and Peter Capine were cleared of murder, but during the trial the judge suggested that 3 other men's conduct should be closely looked at. Simon McCullough, the clerk at the campsite where Julie died, will come up for trial in 1999. Some crimes can have a horrific effect on the rest of the victim's life, but at least, in some cases, the indomitable qualities of the human spirit can enable the individual to build a new life from the ashes of the old. With murder, there is no such hope, no such relief. That's why they call murder the unspeakable crime.